The moment I pushed open the door to Redwood Valley Diner, I felt every pair of eyes flick in my direction. The cold morning air was still clinging to my clothes, but the heat inside the diner hit me like a solid wall. I tightened my grip on my crutch, trying to steady my balance on the uneven tile floor. I told myself it would be a quick breakfast. In and out. No attention, no problems. I should have known better. Before I could make it 2 steps past the threshold, a burst of laughter exploded from my right. It was sharp and loud and carried the kind of mocking tone that hits like a slap. 3 young white men were seated in the booth near the window. They looked straight at me, elbows on the table, grinning like they had been waiting for something entertaining to walk in. One of them leaned back and dragged his sneaker across the floor in a long, dramatic scrape, imitating the sound of my crutch on the tile. The other 2 burst into louder laughter, the sound bouncing off the diner walls until people began turning their heads. I tried to ignore them. I kept my eyes on the empty booth near the back and focused on moving one careful step at a time. My right leg shook with each shift of weight, and I prayed no one noticed. The second I passed their booth, one of them pitched his voice high like a child imitating someone struggling. He made a pitiful whimpering sound and clutched his leg with exaggerated drama. His friends leaned forward, smirking, waiting to see if I would react. I did not, or at least I tried not to. My jaw tightened, my throat burned, but I kept moving. One step, then another. The diner was busy. Nearly every table was full. The smell of bacon grease and coffee hung heavy in the air. A waitress carrying 2 plates looked up just long enough to register what was happening, then quickly looked away and moved faster. A couple in the corner stiffened, clearly aware of the scene, but unwilling to get involved. An older man in a trucker hat lifted his newspaper a little higher, hiding behind it even though I could see the trimmer in his hands. I felt the heat rise up my neck. I hated that heat. That helpless humiliation that comes when people choose to watch instead of help. I gripped my crutch harder and kept my eyes down. I was almost at the booth. I just needed to sit. Once I sat, they would lose interest. They always did. But before I could reach the table, one of the men shouted across the diner, "Careful! Do not fall! It is not our fault if you break again." His voice carried clearly. The chatter in the room dipped for a moment. Forks paused. Cups stopped midair. A cold silence washed over everything thin and sharp like glass. I felt the back of my eyes sting, but I refused to let tears show. I straightened my shoulders, trying to act like I had heard worse. Because in truth, I had. I told myself to keep walking. Just sit. Just breathe. But humiliation has a way of slowing the world down. You feel every second stretch and bend until it becomes a weight you cannot shake. I could feel the judgment in the room. I could feel pity settling over me like an unwanted coat. I could feel people waiting silently to see how much more the 3 men would push. When I reached the booth, my hand slipped slightly on the edge of the table. My crutch shifted and made a harsh dragging sound that I could not control. It echoed through the diner like a mistake I was not allowed to make. The 3 men burst into fresh laughter louder than before, as if my stumble was the punchline they had been waiting for. I sat down quickly, trying to hide the shaking in my hands. My heart thudded so hard it made my chest tight. I stared at the menu without seeing a single word. My ears felt hot. My breathing came shallow. The diner around me blurred at the edges. I tried to tune everything out, but their voices kept cutting through. One of them said in a syrupy voice filled with fake concern, "Poor thing. Maybe we should get her a helmet next time she decides to walk in public." His friends snickered. A woman across the aisle looked away again, pretending to focus on her coffee. The waitress behind the counter wiped the same spot 3 times, refusing to lift her head. It struck me then that I was completely alone in a room full of people. There were 50 eyes in that diner, and not one person was willing to break the silence. Not one person was willing to say enough. Not one person saw me as someone worth defending. I felt stripped down to nothing but the limp in my leg and the humiliation painted across my face. I forced myself to sit still, to breathe, to wait for the moment to pass. But the truth hit me harder than any insult. The moment was not passing. It was getting worse, and I knew with a sinking feeling settling into my stomach that this was only the beginning. The laughter kept echoing long after I settled into the booth, bouncing around the diner like it had nowhere else to go. It was the kind of laughter that did not need volume to hurt. It only needed intention. I could feel it crawling up my spine, tight and cold, while I tried to focus on the laminated menu in front of me. The words were there, but they looked like black smudges floating on beige paper. My eyes kept drifting, drawn not by choice, but by instinct, to the people around me who pretended this was not happening. At the counter, a woman stirred her coffee so hard the spoon kept clinking against the cup. Her jaw was tense and her lips pulled together in a thin line that told me she definitely heard the three men, but she chose to anchor her attention to the swirl of her drink instead of the swirl of cruelty behind her. A man in a plaid shirt sitting at the bar stool closest to the door glanced up once. His eyes met mine for a brief second. It was a flash of awkward sympathy, the kind people give when they know something wrong is happening, but they are too afraid or irritated or tired to do anything about it. He looked away as soon as one of the men laughed again, like he did not want to be caught caring too much. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I hated this part more than the actual insults. The silence, the calculated decision from strangers to save themselves at the cost of letting me drown. One of the bullies pushed his empty glass to the middle of their table and tapped it with a fork like he was ringing a bell. His eyes were on me when he said loud enough for half the diner to hear, "I wonder how far she can get without falling today." His friends cracked up, slapping the booth cushions, drawing even more attention. My pulse raced as heat crept over my face. The waitress walked by with a pot of coffee clutched in her hand. For a split second, hope flared in me like a match. Maybe she would say something. Maybe she would at least look at them with disapproval. But she kept her eyes fixed on the pot as if it held the secrets of the universe. When she reached my table, she poured coffee into my cup without glancing up. Her voice was polite, rehearsed, tired. "Refill." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." She nodded stiffly and walked off as quickly as she came. Not even a whisper of acknowledgement that three grown men were treating me like a circus show. She could have said something. She could have offered help. She could have stood near my table even if she did not want to speak up. She could have chosen not to abandon me to their cruelty. But she did. Again. The silence in that diner was not real silence. It had shape and weight and intention. It had a heartbeat. It pressed on my chest like a steady hand. Every person in that room knew what was happening. They all made a choice. And every one of those choices came together to form a wall that boxed me in. The second man in the group stretched his arms above his head dramatically and then let them flop down, pretending to mimic someone struggling to move. He dragged his leg along the floor, exaggerating the limp, his mouth open in a twisted grin as he said, "Look at me! I am doing my best impression of little Limpy over there." My breath hitched. The third man pulled out his phone, tilted it toward me, and whispered something that made the others snort. Recording. I did not know if he really was, or if it was just another layer of intimidation. Either way, the room suddenly felt smaller, hotter, more suffocating. I clutched my hands together under the table, fingers pressed so tight they hurt. I told myself not to react. If I reacted, they won. If I stayed calm, maybe the moment would pass. It did not. I felt the familiar burn of shame spreading through my chest, not because of what they said, but because so many people around me were letting it happen. Shame grows bigger when no one interrupts it. Someone in the booth behind me shifted. A soft sniff. Maybe someone was uncomfortable. Maybe someone wanted to get up, but no chair scraped. No voice rose. Not one person turned around. Society has rules in places like this. Rules people follow even when following them hurts someone. Do not get involved. Do not cause trouble. Do not speak unless it affects you. I had lived enough years in this kind of body in this kind of town to know the rules better than anyone. The problem was that the rules never protected me. They protected the loudest cowards in the room. The men kept laughing. I felt each laugh like a shove to the chest. My eyes stung. My throat felt tight. I blinked quickly, willing the tears to back away. Crying in front of people like this would only make them hungrier. One of the men leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He lowered his voice just enough that only I could hear, drawing me into a private cruelty. bet you wish you stayed home today." My fingers curled around the edge of the menu knuckles, white and shaking. I felt trapped between the sound of their mocking and the sound of everyone else choosing to let it happen. And that silence, more than anything they said, was the thing that hurt the most. I told myself that if I could just get out of that booth and walk toward the door, the whole thing would be over. I did not care about breakfast anymore. I did not care about the coffee cooling in front of me. I only cared about getting out of that room where humiliation was clinging to me like smoke. My hands trembled as I pushed myself up from the seat, balancing on my good leg and gripping my crutch until my palm hurt. I took one breath, then another, and stepped out into the aisle. I tried to move quickly, but quick was impossible for me. Every shift of weight sent a sharp reminder up my leg, and my crutch clicked against the floor in a rhythm I wished I could silence. The men noticed immediately. One of them straightened with a grin that felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. "Leaving so soon, sweetheart?" He slid out of the booth before I could respond. He moved fast, cutting me off with a careless swagger as if he had every right to stand in my path. I froze. My breath caught halfway up my throat. The space between us was barely 2 feet, but to me it felt like a wall. I shifted my crutch to try and angle around him, but the second man slipped out behind him and planted himself to my left. The third stayed seated but turned his phone toward me again, as if this was some game he was filming for his own amusement. I said quietly, "Let me go." My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. The man in front of me raised his eyebrows like he found my request funny. "Aw, she talks." His friend laughed. "Be careful. She might fall on you. Then we will all have to pretend to care." The heat flushed across my face. Every instinct told me to back up, but the booth behind me blocked the way. I felt boxed in, pinned between the table and their bodies. A surge of panic rose sharp and cold. I tightened my grip on my crutch, not because I thought I could defend myself with it, but because it was the only thing keeping me upright. The man to my left reached for it, then stopped short, probably realizing that taking it would cross a line even he did not want to cross in public. Instead, he tapped it with his knuckle like he was tapping a toy. "You do not need this right. She can hop." "Can you hop?" He hopped on one foot in a mocking little dance. His friend burst out laughing, clapping his hands once like he had just witnessed a great performance. People were watching. I could feel their eyes on us. The couple in the corner who had ignored me earlier was now stiff with discomfort. The older man behind his newspaper lowered it just enough for his eyes to peek over the top. One of the construction workers stood halfway from his seat, then sat back down when one of his coworkers shook his head. "No one was going to help me." My chest tightened. I swallowed hard and said again louder this time, "Let me go." The man in front of me leaned closer. His breath smelled like syrup and cheap whiskey, the kind people slip into their coffee when they want to start the day numb. "Why, you got somewhere important to be." His friend chimed in. "Maybe she is late for her pity party." The third man held up his phone. "Say hi." The red recording light blinked. My stomach dropped. I turned my head away so the camera would not catch the fear stretching across my face. I told myself not to cry. I told myself to stand still. I told myself to breathe. But my breaths were coming fast now, too fast. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the panic clawed up my throat. My leg wobbled, and for a split second I felt my balance slip. The man blocking me laughed and reached out like he might steady me, but the gesture was a taunt rather than help. "Careful there. Would not want you to break anything important." The urge to scream built inside my chest. It was not just fear anymore. It was fury. Fury at them for cornering me. Fury at myself for being stuck in this body that made me an easy target. Fury at everyone else for choosing the comfort of silence over the discomfort of doing what was right. I tightened every muscle I had braced myself and tried to walk past the man in front of me. He stepped sideways, blocking me again. I tried the other side. The second man shifted as well, like they were playing some twisted game of keep away. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my teeth. "I am leaving," I managed. "Let me through." The man with the phone whistled. "Someone is getting brave." Then he aimed the camera even more directly at me, zooming in like he was capturing the climax of their little show. My palms were sweating. My throat was tight. The exit was only 10 steps away, but it might as well have been a mile. I thought for a moment about calling out for help, but calling out in a room full of people who had already chosen silence felt pointless. The humiliation hit all over again. Bigger this time, heavier, crushing. I looked around one more time. No one stood. No one moved. The world had shrunk to 3 faces full of cruelty and one door I could not reach. In that moment, the fear and the shame and the helpless anger blended into something sharp, something painful, something that told me I had to get out even if my legs gave out trying. I gripped my crutch, steadied my shaking leg, and tried to push past them one last time. And that was the moment the diner door swung open behind them with a sound that cut through everything. The diner door swung open with a force that startled everyone, the metal frame hitting the stopper with a loud crack that sliced through the noise of the morning rush. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze in midair. Even the 3 men who had been blocking me turned their heads, annoyed at first, then confused, then something else entirely, as the figure in the doorway came into view. A tall man stepped inside, and for a moment, the room seemed to breathe differently. He filled the entrance without even trying. His boots hit the tile floor with a steady weight, not rushed, not dragging, just solid and unapologetic. He wore a heavy black leather jacket with patches on the sleeves and back patches that even from where I stood I recognized instinctively. Hell's Angels. The bold white letters curved across his shoulders like a warning label. His hair was long and streaked with gray, tied loosely behind his neck. His beard was thick, but trimmed just enough to show he took care of himself. He had the kind of presence that made you straighten your spine even if you did not know why. The kind that made people step out of his path without being asked. The 3 men fell silent in a way I had not seen since this whole thing began. Their smirks faltered just slightly, as if something primal inside them sensed a shift they did not fully understand. I felt it too. Not fear exactly, more like gravity. The man walked forward slowly, scanning the room with eyes that looked pale even from a distance, eyes that did not rush from one thing to another, but studied everything with a deliberate calm. He did not look angry. He did not look impatient. He looked aware. That awareness alone was enough to make the air feel charged. He followed a path straight down the aisle, passing booth after booth, and each person he walked by lowered their gaze a little like they were afraid he might ask what they had or had not done a moment earlier. I stood frozen in place, gripping my crutch tightly. My heartbeat thudded loud in my ears. The 3 men were still in front of me, but for the first time since they started harassing me, they shifted their weight uneasily, glancing briefly at each other. The man reached the end of the aisle, paused for a second, and looked at me. Really looked at me. Not at my crutch. Not at my limp. Not at the fear on my face. His eyes met mine with a clarity that cut through everything, as if he could see the entire story without needing anyone to explain it. My breathing stuttered. His expression did not change. But there was something in his face that felt like recognition. Not that he knew me, but that he knew the look I wore. The look of someone cornered, someone embarrassed, someone who had been abandoned by the room long before he walked in. He shifted his gaze to the men standing in my way. His head tilted slightly, and something hard flickered across his features. Then he stepped closer, closing the distance like a man who knew exactly what he was walking into and did not fear a second of it. The man in front of me squared his shoulders, trying to act unfazed. His voice cracked anyway when he said, "Do you need something, man?" The stranger did not answer him. Instead, he moved to my side, placing himself just enough between me and them that I felt the air shift around my body. He looked down at me for only a moment and asked quietly, "Kid, someone bothering you?" His voice was low and rough, the kind that came from years of smoke or shouting, or maybe both, but it carried a calm so steady it was somehow more grounding than the floor beneath me. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My throat was too tight. My fear had wrapped itself around my words like a knot. He did not push me. He did not ask again. He simply watched me for a heartbeat before turning his full attention back to the 3 men. His presence alone seemed to stretch across the space like a shadow cast by a much larger force. The man closest to me huffed a small laugh as if trying to recover his confidence. We are just having fun. She is fine. The stranger did not react. Not with anger, not with annoyance. He stepped one small inch forward and the man backed up without meaning to. The stranger asked again, but this time his voice carried a weight that seemed impossible to ignore. Is she fine? The man hesitated. His eyes darted toward his friends as if begging for backup. None came. In that silence, something shifted inside me. For the first time that morning, I felt the tiniest thread of safety tug at the edge of all the fear. I whispered, barely audible, I want to leave. The stranger nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if acknowledging a truth that needed no explanation. Then he fixed his gaze back on the men, and his jaw tightened just enough to be noticeable. Move. One word. No shout. No threat. But the command carried so much weight that even I felt the instinct to step aside. The three men stiffened. No one moved. The diner did not breathe. Then, with a tension so heavy it almost hummed, the man in front of me shifted 1 foot to the side. Only an inch. But the stranger raised an eyebrow, and that tiny movement from him seemed to finish what his words had started. The men stepped aside, fully clearing the aisle. My chest loosened slightly. I tightened my grip on my crutch and prepared to leave. That was when the man with the phone muttered something under his breath that snapped the mood like a twig. This is not over. The stranger turned toward him slowly, and the look he gave him changed the air again. And in that moment, I knew something much bigger was about to unfold. The words from the man with the phone hung in the air like a challenge tossed across a line neither of us had drawn. This is not over. He said it quietly, but the tone was sharp enough to slice through whatever fragile order the stranger had just created. The stranger tilted his head slightly, not in confusion, but in something closer to disbelief, like he was genuinely surprised someone so small could make a threat sound so empty. He took one slow breath and stepped forward only a few inches, but the movement felt like the floor shifted with him. No one in the diner spoke. No fork clinked. No coffee cup touched a saucer. It was the kind of silence that happens when people sense a storm has just changed direction and they do not know yet whether it will break everything or pass overhead. The stranger did not raise his voice. He did not puff out his chest. He did not use any of the theatrics the three men had relied on all morning. Instead, he said calmly, "You are done talking." The man holding the phone blinked like he did not fully understand the words. His confidence flickered. He looked at his friends expecting one of them to back him up, but neither moved. The stranger kept his eyes steady on them, the kind of steady that I imagined came from surviving things most people would never understand. He looked at the men as if he had already taken their measure, already weighed their intentions, and found nothing worth fearing. I could feel his presence like a protective barrier drawn around me, even though he had not touched me once. He said again, still soft but unshakably firm, "She said she wants to leave. Move aside." The first man swallowed hard. His throat bobbed in a way that betrayed nerves he did not want anyone to see. He tried to laugh it off, forcing a smile that cracked at the edges. "Relax. We were just messing around." The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly. "Just messing around. Is that what you call trapping a girl between your table and the door?" The man stiffened but still tried to hold the smile. "No harm done? She is fine." The stranger looked down at me for one brief second, and I knew that he knew I was not fine. Not even close. He turned back to the men, and the quiet that followed felt like a verdict waiting to be spoken. He stepped closer again. This time, the man backed up, fully bumping into the edge of his booth. I saw the moment he realized he had nowhere else to go. His breath hitched. His eyes widened just enough to betray the panic he was trying to hide. The stranger leaned forward a fraction close enough that the man could not look anywhere but at him. "Say it again. Tell her she is fine." The man's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face paled. The stranger straightened slowly, the movement controlled and steady. Then he spoke again. Not loud, just clear. "You three are going to sit back down. You are going to shut your mouths. And you are going to let her walk out of here without another word." The second man bristled for a moment, some leftover pride twitching through his posture. "Why should we listen to you?" The stranger turned toward him with such deliberate calm that the question answered itself. The second man's bravado faltered instantly. His gaze dropped to the floor. The stranger said, "Because you know exactly why, and because I am not asking you, I am telling you." The room seemed to tighten around the words. The first man sat down abruptly, the booth cushion squeaking under his weight. The second hesitated, but when the stranger took a single breath in, he folded and slid back into the booth as well. Only the man with the camera stayed standing, his jaw tight and his eyes darting between his friends and the stranger as if he could not decide whether to obey or make things worse. The stranger held his gaze. "Put the phone away." The man did not move. The stranger stepped closer. Not fast, not threatening, just steady. That steady was what made it powerful. Finally, the man lowered his phone and stuffed it into his jacket pocket, the false confidence draining from him like water through a sieve. "Good. Now sit." The man sat. I felt my breath rise in my chest, but it did not escape yet. I was still shaking, still cornered by fear, still unsure whether this stranger had saved me or simply paused the danger. He turned to me, then his eyes losing some of the hard edge they had carried a moment before. His voice lowered when he spoke. "You can go now." I nodded, unable to speak yet, but when I tried to step forward, my leg wobbled. He reached out instinctively, not to grab me, not to steady me from behind, but to hover his hand near my elbow in case I needed the support. The gesture was respectful, protective, and careful in a way that made my throat tighten. I managed a small step, then another. The aisle was mine again. People watched me walk past, but their eyes were different now. Less judgment, more shame, more realization, more awareness that they had been witnesses to something they did not stop. As I moved forward, the stranger walked behind me slowly, not crowding me, not overshadowing me, just making sure the distance between me and the men stayed intact. When we reached the midpoint of the diner, I heard one of the men mutter under his breath loud enough for his friends, but not for the stranger. "This idiot biker is going to get what is coming to him." The stranger stopped walking. He did not turn around. He did not respond. He just stood still, and the energy in the room froze all over again. I knew then that the situation had not ended. It had only shifted, and something much bigger was already on its way. I had just taken another step toward the door when the sound of a chair scraping violently across the floor cut through the diner. It was sharp and deliberate, the kind of sound someone makes when they want attention. I knew without turning that it came from the booth behind us. My shoulders tightened, my hand clenched around my crutch. The stranger paused behind me, his presence steady and unmoving, as the man with the phone rose from his seat again. His friends shot him panicked glances, but he ignored them entirely, driven by a mixture of bruised ego and the kind of arrogance that grows in men who never face consequences. He lifted his phone once more, his face twisted into something between defiance and desperation. "You think you can walk in here and talk to us like that?" He spit the words out. "You think you are some kind of hero." The stranger did not turn around. He did not acknowledge the man at all. He just said quietly, "Keep walking, kid." I swallowed hard. I tried, but the man's voice rose louder now, targeting anyone who would listen. "Somebody better call the cops because this psycho biker just threatened us." A ripple of uneasy murmurs spread across the diner. People shifted in their seats, glancing between me, the stranger, and the booth, where the man now stood with his finger already tapping the screen. His friends whispered frantically, trying to get him to sit down, but pride had swallowed him whole. He pressed his phone to his ear. "Yes, I need the police. There is a violent man here. He is threatening customers. He looks unstable. He is wearing some kind of gang jacket. You should hurry." My heart dropped into my stomach. The stranger still did not react. He stood at my back like a wall carved from stone, steady and unshaken. But I could feel the shift in the room. The judgment returned to some of the faces. The fear, too. The waitress froze behind the counter, clutching her coffee pot like a shield. The older man with the newspaper shook his head slowly, unable to believe what he was hearing, but still doing nothing. I turned toward the stranger with a sinking feeling I could not swallow. "They are lying. You did not threaten anyone." The stranger finally looked at me, and for the first time since he walked in, there was something almost tired in his eyes. Not defeated. Just familiar. Like this was not the first time someone tried to flip a story to protect themselves. "I know," he said quietly. Then he shifted his attention back to the aisle. "Let them call. The truth is not going anywhere." The man with the phone smirked when he ended the call, emboldened by the idea of backup on the way. His voice grew louder, more dramatic, meant to paint the stranger as dangerous before the police even arrived. "Yeah, you better stay right there. They will deal with you." The people around us did not know what to do with themselves. Some looked guilty. Some looked intrigued. Some watched with the hungry fascination people feel when they sense a spectacle might unfold. I felt sick. I wanted to scream at everyone that this man had done nothing but protect me. I wanted to shout the truth before lies hardened into official reports. But my throat was too tight, my fear twisted with shame. The stranger must have sensed how shaken I was because he took one small step toward me, placing himself more fully between me and the booth. His voice was still calm, still steady. "This is not your fault. Stay right here." The seconds stretched long and heavy. Outside, I could faintly hear the hum of traffic, the normal world continuing while mine spun wildly out of control. The men in the booth sat again, whispering urgently, probably realizing they had taken things too far but too prideful to undo any of it. The man with the phone sighed loudly, tapping his fingers on the table like he was impatient for the police to arrive and remove this unexpected obstacle to his ego. The stranger stood unmoving, a pillar, a shield, a quiet force of nature. He did not check the door. He did not pace. He did not defend himself to the room. He simply waited as if he had full confidence that the truth would speak louder than the lies when the moment came. I wished I had that confidence. My chest tightened with each second. I stared at the reflection in the window across the diner. I looked small, fragile, cornered, but right behind me stood a man who did not look afraid of anything. For a moment, I let that steady presence ground me, let it borrow a bit of strength for me to hold. Then the distant wail of a siren grew louder. My stomach twisted. The hum rose sharp and approaching fast, cutting through the quiet hum of conversation outside. The man with the phone straightened proudly, puffing out his chest like a child getting ready to tell on a sibling. "They are here," he whispered to his friends with smug satisfaction. The stranger still did not move. Sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed through the diner windows in bright bursts. A wave of dread washed over me. I could already picture the scene. 4 officers walking in. 3 men acting like victims. A biker jacket becoming an easy target. A truth that might drown beneath the weight of appearances. I tightened my grip on my crutch until my hand ached. My voice finally strained past the pain in my throat. "What is going to happen? They do not know you." The stranger looked at the door where the lights were flashing and said with quiet certainty, "They will." Tires crunched outside, doors slammed, footsteps approached, and the diner collectively held its breath. The diner door flew open with a gust of hot air from outside, and 4 uniformed officers stepped in with the kind of presence that instantly rearranged the energy in a room. Their boots hit the tile floor in quick, steady beats, their hands hovering near their belts as their eyes swept the diner with metallic focus. The chatter died instantly. Even the hum of the neon sign above the counter sounded louder in the sudden stillness. My heart hammered against my ribs. The stranger stood behind me, steady as ever, but I could feel the weight of what was about to happen settle around us like dust. The officer in front was young, maybe mid-20s, with a rigid jawline that looked like he used discipline to hide inexperience. His hand sat close to his holster, too close, and even though he was not looking directly at me, his gaze scraped over the stranger like a judgment already forming. Behind him, 2 other officers fanned out slightly, scanning the booths with quick, calculated glances. The 4th, older than the rest, stayed near the back, his face unreadable behind dark sunglasses even indoors. The man with the phone shot to his feet like a puppet pulled by strings. "There. That is him. That is the guy." He pointed toward the stranger with exaggerated panic. "He threatened us. He is dangerous. He came at us." The young officer's eyes snapped to the stranger with immediate suspicion. "Sir, Keep your hands where I can see them." His tone had the sharpness of someone who expected trouble before trouble even existed. The stranger did not move. His hands were already relaxed at his sides, palms open, nothing hidden. He said nothing, and somehow that quiet unnerved the young officer even more. The men in the booth played their roles perfectly. One clutched his chest like he had barely escaped harm. Another nodded rapidly as if confirming every lie before it could be questioned. The third added he was shouting. He tried to start a fight. "Look at him. You can tell." I felt a wave of nausea crawl through me. This was the part I feared most. When lies travel faster than truth. When uniforms listen to the loudest voice, not the right one. I opened my mouth to speak, but fear tightened my throat again and the words tangled themselves before reaching the air. The officer took one step closer to the stranger. "Sir, I am asking you to step away from the girl." The stranger's voice came low and level. "I am not touching her. I am not threatening anyone." His voice held no tremor, no anger, no fear, just clarity. But the young officer's body language grew more tense. "Sir, I need you to step back. Now." One of the younger officers behind him muttered under his breath, "Bikers." Every time. My pulse quickened. The diner felt smaller, the walls closer, the air too thick to breathe. I forced my voice through the tightness in my chest. He did not do anything. The officers barely glanced at me. The young one said, "Ma'am, we will talk to you in a moment." "Please stay still." Stay still. As if I had caused this. As if I were part of the problem rather than the victim. A painful heat flushed across my face. The young officer moved closer to the stranger and his hand tightened around his holster. "Sir, last warning. Step back." The stranger finally lifted his hands slightly palms forward, showing complete calm and compliance. He stepped back half a pace, giving me space, though I had never felt threatened by him. The young officer nodded toward another officer. "Move in." My stomach twisted. They were about to detain him. For protecting me. For doing what everyone else in that room refused to do. The officer beside him stepped forward, reaching for the stranger's wrist. The stranger did not resist, but the moment the officer's hand touched him, a voice cut through the room with such command that it froze every muscle in the diner. "Officer, what are you doing?" The young officer whipped his head toward the back of the group. The man with the sunglasses had finally removed them, revealing sharp blue eyes that had seen far more than the rest of the room combined. His expression shifted dramatically the moment he looked at the stranger. The stranger's name left his mouth before anyone could react. Ronan West. The name hung in the air like a heavy stone. A ripple moved through the officers. The one grabbing his wrist halted immediately. The young officer blinked in confusion. "You know him, sir?" The older officer stepped forward, his voice carrying authority without even trying. "Everyone step back from him. Now!" The officers did as told instantly. The shift in power happened so fast the man with the phone nearly dropped it. His face blanched. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The older officer moved closer, studying the stranger with disbelief mixed with something that almost looked like relief. "I will be damned. Ronan West. I have not seen you in years. Thought you were gone." The stranger nodded once in acknowledgement, his expression unreadable. The younger officers exchanged glances, the pieces slowly clicking together but not fully forming a picture yet. The older officer finally looked around the room. "Which one of you called this in?" The man with the phone raised his hand slightly, his earlier confidence gone. The officer stared at him so intensely, the man shrank back. "And what exactly did you say happened?" the man stuttered. He threatened us. He was starting something." The officer's eyes narrowed with slow, controlled disbelief. "That does not sound like Ronan West. Not even a little." The young officer stepped forward slowly, still trying to understand what he had almost done. "Sir, who is he?" The older officer looked at him with the kind of expression that made it clear he expected everyone in town to know. "He is a decorated firefighter who saved more lives in this county than you have years of experience." The silence that followed was absolute. The lies had begun to crumble. and I felt the entire room shift again, this time toward a truth none of them expected. When the older officer said his name out loud, the entire diner seemed to shift in a way that made the air feel heavier than before. It was as if someone had pulled a curtain back and revealed a truth no one expected to witness that morning. The officers who had approached Ronan a moment earlier stepped back with stiff movements as if their bodies were trying to catch up to what their minds had just learned. Even the man who had called the police lowered his arm slowly as if hoping no one would remember he had started all of this. Ronan did not look triumphant or relieved or angry. He simply stood with the same steady posture he had held from the moment he entered the diner, as if the chaos unfolding around him were nothing more than another storm he had already learned how to withstand. The older officer, now standing only a few feet away, looked at him with a mixture of surprise, respect, and something that almost resembled guilt. He exhaled slowly, as if he were letting go of years he had not realized he was still carrying. "Ronan West," he repeated, but softer this time, as if speaking to a piece of the past instead of a man standing before him. The younger officers shifted awkwardly, clearly thrown off balance by the sudden turn in authority. One of them whispered something under his breath, but his voice carried a note of embarrassment that made him snap his mouth shut when the older officer shot him a look. The diner that had been buzzing with tension moments earlier now held a very different kind of silence. It was not fear this time, but recognition and the uncomfortable realization that they had all made snap judgments before understanding the truth. The man with the phone swallowed hard, his earlier bravado dissolving into something much smaller as the older officer turned toward him. "What exactly did you say happened here?" he asked, his voice firm but no longer raised because he did not need volume to command a room. The man stuttered his gaze, flicking between the officer and Ronan like he was searching for a version of the story that might still save him. He did not find one. He tried anyway, choosing the same shaky tone cowards used when courage failed them. He was being aggressive. The man insisted, even though his voice wavered. "He came at us for no reason, we were just sitting here." The older officer raised one eyebrow in a way that conveyed more disbelief than any shouted accusation ever could. He turned back to Ronan, whose calm remained unbroken, as if none of this surprised him in the slightest. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" the officer asked, though it sounded more like a courtesy than a genuine request, as if he already trusted Ronan's version without needing to hear it. Ronan's eyes shifted briefly toward me, and something inside my chest tightened again, but not from fear this time, but from the strange comfort of being seen. He did not speak right away, which somehow made everyone lean closer without realizing it. When he finally did, his voice was steady enough to quiet even the buzz of the overhead lights. "I did not threaten anyone. He said I told them to let her walk out and they refused." He did not mention the insults, the taunting, the way they had cornered me, or the humiliation that had soaked into every inch of the room before he entered. He offered nothing but the simple truth, and somehow that truth felt louder than any retelling of the cruelty would have been. The older officer nodded slowly, absorbing the words with an expression that carried both trust and a simmering frustration that he had almost walked in on a lie becoming fact. He turned toward the booth where the men sat shrinking under the weight of their unraveling story. He looked all three of them in the eye with the firm patience of someone who had dealt with enough false reports to recognize another one instantly. "I am going to ask you again," he said. "Which one of you was threatened?" None of them answered. The officer waited, letting the silence drag like a net, pulling the truth upward piece by piece. Finally, the man with the phone dropped his gaze and muttered something so faint the room held its breath to catch it. "He did not threaten us." The officer asked him to repeat it louder, and when he did, the entire diner seemed to exhale at once like a truth finally finding its place. The older officer nodded firmly, and the weight in the room shifted toward Ronan in a way that told everyone the story had officially flipped. He looked at me then, with a softer expression, as if silently asking whether I was ready to speak the truth myself. My voice trembled, but I forced it through the fear that still clung to me and said, "He is telling the truth. He protected me when no one else did." The older officer gave a single slow nod, and the tension in the diner settled into something that felt almost like collective shame. People shifted in their seats, unable to meet my eyes or Ronan's as they realized how quickly they had believed the worst. The officer looked at the men one last time and said, "We will review the footage, but I already know what we are going to find." And in that moment, I understood why the name Ronan West carried weight that even lies could not drown. Truth had finally stepped into the room, and it had chosen its side. It was the beginning of something I never expected. The older officer's words lingered in the air long after he said them, shaping the room with a gravity none of us could ignore. But what came next carved that moment into something the entire diner would remember for years. He stepped closer to Ronan, studying him like he was confirming a memory pulled from a lifetime ago. His voice softened just barely when he spoke again. "I did not think I would see you again after the refinery explosion." A hush fell over the room, as if someone had placed a hand over every mouth at once. The refinery explosion was local legend around here, a disaster people still talked about with lowered voices and sighs that carried the weight of loss. My heart skipped. I turned to look at Ronan fully now, seeing him not as the man who had stepped between me and cruelty, but as someone who carried a past that stretched far beyond the walls of this diner. The younger officers exchanged confused glances until the oldest one took a deep breath and faced them, the weight of his next words drawing everyone in. This man pulled 19 people out of that fire when the tanks blew. 19. One flame-filled corridor at a time. I swear half the town only lived because he would not leave them. The diner went silent in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with awe. 19 people. I felt my breath catch. The image bloomed in my mind before I could stop it. Smoke, collapsing beams, heat so intense it could melt steel and bone. A man running back into the fire again and again until there was no one left to save but himself. The older officer continued, his voice trembling with the memory. "We thought we lost him that night. The roof caved in. They pulled him out hours later. I do not know how he even survived." Ronan's eyes did not flinch, but there was something in them, a flicker of memory or pain or something too personal to name. He did not look away from the officer, but it was clear he was somewhere else entirely for a moment, deep in a piece of his past that no one in this diner had earned the right to see. The older officer exhaled and shook his head slowly, and when he recovered, he would not let the town make a hero out of him. He refused every ceremony, every interview, every plaque. Then he disappeared. Just left. And I guess now we know where he went. The stranger. Ronan. The biker everyone had feared on sight. The man the three cowards had tried to weaponize the police against. He had been the kind of hero people write newspaper articles about, the kind whose story would normally be told with photographs of medals and parades. But he had none of that. He stood there in a leather jacket, calm and almost distant, as if the version of him the officer described was a ghost he knew but did not claim. The men in the booth began shrinking into themselves like shadows in fading light. Their faces turned pale. Their arrogance drained from them in shaky breaths. A few people in the diner pressed their hands to their mouths. One whispered a prayer. Another whispered his name, as if testing whether it truly belonged to the man standing in front of us. I could not stop staring. Every detail shifted in my understanding. The steady presence, the quiet confidence, the calm in the face of hostility. The way he had looked at me like he recognized something in my fear. He had lived through things that broke other people. Maybe that was why he stepped in when no one else did, because he knew what it was like to face something alone. The older officer cleared his throat and turned toward the three men, his voice cooling into something sharp and official. "You called in a false report on one of the most decorated first responders this county has ever seen. A man who saved more lives in one night than you will touch in your entire lifetime. Do you understand what you just did?" The men said nothing. Their silence was no longer bold. It was terrified, ashamed. One stammered, "We did not know who he was." The officer cut him off. Then, "Maybe do not assume a man is dangerous because he looks different from you." The words landed like stones. People in the diner shifted, some with shame, some with agreement, some with the kind of reflection that comes when truth exposes something ugly beneath the surface. The officer stepped back toward Ronan. "I should have recognized you sooner." I am sorry. Ronan nodded once, a gesture that held neither resentment nor forgiveness, simply acknowledgement. I am not here for recognition. The officer searched his face as if trying to understand the man he was speaking to. Then, why are you here? Ronan's eyes shifted back to me, not in pity, not in heroism, just quiet understanding, because she deserved someone to stand up. His voice dropped slightly. No one else did. The words burned straight through me. My throat tightened and my eyes stung, not from humiliation this time, but from the sudden weight of being defended in a world where most people looked away. The officer looked around the diner, taking in the bowed heads, the shame, the lingering fear. He exhaled deeply. The truth is, this town needed to remember who you are, and who we are supposed to be. He nodded at the manager. We will need the security footage. The manager scrambled toward the back, his face pale. As he disappeared, the older officer turned back to the booth of cowards. You will be staying until we sort this out. His voice left no room for argument. And in that moment, I realized the story of Ronan West was far bigger than anything the men had tried to paint him as. Far bigger than any lie they could tell. Far bigger than the quiet room that had failed me that morning. It was the story the town had forgotten, but it was about to remember. The manager returned from the back room with a small flash drive clutched in his shaking hand, his face pale as if he feared the footage would expose more than just the truth about the three men. Maybe he feared it would expose the silence of the entire diner as well. He handed the drive to the older officer without speaking, and the officer took it with a calm steadiness that made the room feel even quieter. Every eye in the diner followed him as he walked toward the small television mounted above the counter, the kind usually reserved for morning news and local weather. The television flickered as the manager switched inputs, the screen turning black before the grainy diner footage appeared with a timestamp in the top corner marking everything that had happened only minutes before. My stomach tightened. People leaned forward, unconsciously drawn by the inevitability of what the footage would reveal. The older officer nodded once at the manager. Play it. The video rolled in silence, distorted slightly by the low resolution, but clear enough to capture every movement. There I was near the entrance, stepping inside, with my crutch as quietly as I could. There were the three men at their booth, their eyes landing on me with that cruel anticipation I had felt the second I walked in. The first man elbowed the second, pointing toward me with a grin already forming. The second leaned back in his seat and exaggerated the limp, dragging his leg across the floor in a way that even on screen looked vicious in its mockery. Laughter. Bodies shaking with it. Even without audio, you could feel the venom in it. I watched myself freeze for a split second, gripping my crutch just a little tighter before trying to move past them. My chest ached, watching it all play out from the outside, seeing the exact moment their ridicule hit me like a wave. Then came the part I dreaded most. The first man stood stepping directly in front of me, blocking my way. The second came in from the side, creating a barrier with his body as I stood trapped in the aisle. The third lifted his phone toward me, his lips forming words I remembered all too clearly. The camera caught the moment I tried to step forward again and stumbled, the fear visible in the way my shoulders tightened. My hands curled into fists as the humiliation replayed itself before everyone. A soft gasp escaped someone in the diner. Another person whispered something sharp under their breath. The shame in the room shifted. It no longer clung to me. It slid toward the booth where the three men sat frozen, unable to look away from the evidence they had thought would never come to light. The footage continued. The stranger entered the door swinging open behind him. Even in the grainy recording, his presence seemed to change the air. He walked with calm purpose, scanning the diner before locking eyes on the scene in front of me. The moment he stepped between me and the three men was unmistakable. No aggression, no threats. Just a man positioning himself to protect someone who needed it. The approach of the three men on the recording was even more obvious than I remembered. The first leaned in with aggression thinly disguised as arrogance. The second pointed a finger at Ronan's chest. The third held the phone as if preparing to use it again. The stranger did not flinch. He said nothing that resembled a threat. He never raised his voice. He never raised a hand. He simply stood firm. When the moment came where the first officer nearly reached for Ronan, the entire diner collectively tensed as if reliving the moment with fresh dread. Then the older officer stepped into frame. The recording captured his reaction when he recognized Ronan, the way his posture changed, the way the energy in the room shifted from suspicion to shock. The screen froze as the footage ended and the diner sank into a silence that felt heavier than anything that had come before. The older officer turned around slowly to face the room. "That is clear enough," he said. His voice was low, steady, controlled, but a thread of indignation ran through it like a wire pulled tight. He gestured toward the booth. "You three stand up." The men rose stiffly, faces flushed, bodies trembling with a mix of humiliation and fear. One of them opened his mouth as if to speak, but the officer lifted a hand and cut him off. "I do not need to hear a word from you. Everything is recorded." The room watched in absolute quiet as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a citation pad. "Public harassment, disorderly conduct, filing a false emergency report." His eyes narrowed as he looked at them. "And you will be banned from this establishment for 6 months at minimum. Do you understand?" The first man nodded, eyes downcast. The second swallowed hard. The third, the one who had recorded me, stared at the floor like the tile pattern suddenly fascinated him. The officer continued writing his pen, scratching against the paper with deliberate force. When he finished, he handed each citation over one by one. "Let this be a lesson. A false report wastes resources, puts innocent people at risk, and undermines the credibility of this entire department." He paused. "And if you ever try something like this again, it will not stop at citations." The manager hovered nearby, wringing his hands. He turned toward me, his voice trembling. "I am sorry. I should have stopped this earlier. Breakfast is on the house. Anytime you come in here." I nodded, even though my throat felt too tight to speak. For the first time since walking into this diner, the weight of shame lifted just slightly. Not because the men were punished, but because the truth had finally spoken louder than the lies. I looked back at the screen at the frozen image of myself standing small and alone in the aisle. Then I looked at the stranger beside me, and for the first time that day, I felt something stronger than fear. Relief. The diner slowly began to breathe again, but not in the same rhythm it had before. The tension that once swelled in its walls had broken apart, replaced with a thick, uneasy quiet that felt more like reflection than fear. People shifted in their seats not to whisper or gawk, but because shame had become a weight sitting in their laps. It was strange to stand in the same place where humiliation had nearly swallowed me whole only minutes earlier and feel it shifting into something else. The older officer finished speaking with the manager and turned to me with the kind of expression that carried both apology and respect. "Ma'am, if you need anything from us, anything at all, you let us know." I nodded, though my throat was still raw from fighting back every emotion that had climbed through me since the moment I walked into the diner. "Thank you," I whispered, though I was not entirely sure who the gratitude was for. The officers moved toward the exit with the 3 men who had tormented me shuffling behind them. Their earlier swagger had evaporated completely. Now they walked with their shoulders hunched, their eyes glued to the floor, their steps small and uneven, as if each one carried a reminder of how quickly power could turn into shame. When the door closed behind them, the diner seemed to exhale a long, trembling breath. A faint hum rose from the overhead lights. A fork clinked somewhere in the back booth. Someone coughed quietly, but no one dared to speak until the manager stepped forward again. His voice trembled as he said, "Ma'am, I really am sorry. I should have done something sooner." He wiped his hands on his apron, his eyes unable to meet mine. People like that, they take advantage of silence. And I let them. I nodded again. I understood. That was the truth that hurt the most. Silence was not neutral. It was a choice. One that had cut deeper than any insult. The waitress who had poured my coffee earlier approached now with her hands clasped together tightly in front of her. Her voice cracked as she said, "I should have said something. I should have stood by you." People murmured in agreement, several heads bowing with guilt. I swallowed hard. It was not my job to make them feel better. I knew that. But I also knew what it felt like to carry shame, and the heaviness in their expressions told me they were now carrying a piece of what I had felt alone minutes earlier. Before I could speak, a presence moved beside me. Ronan. He had not stepped away since the moment I froze in the aisle. He simply stayed quiet and tall and steady, as if the chaos in the diner could not touch him even when it threatened to crush me. He shifted his weight now, turning slightly so he faced me more fully. His eyes were softer than before, a pale, thoughtful blue that held things far heavier than anything I had endured today. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said. "Not to them, not to anyone." His voice was low, steady, calm in the way river stones were calm after decades of pressure. It was a voice carved by experience, not performance. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words tangled in my throat. All I could manage was, I did not expect anyone to stand up for me. Something flickered in his expression. Not anger, not pity, but a kind of quiet sadness that felt older than both of us. He shook his head once. "People like them count on that. They count on you believing you are alone." His voice dropped even lower. "And they count on everyone else pretending they cannot see it." My breath hitched a little, and the tears I had fought back earlier threatened to rise again, but they did not come from humiliation this time. They came from something like relief. Something like being seen after hiding for so long behind other people's discomfort. Ronan rubbed his thumb lightly along the edge of the table as if grounding his thoughts before speaking again. "I have seen this my whole life. People who should speak up choosing not to. People who need help being left to drown in situations that never should have happened in the first place." He paused. His gaze held mine. "But I have also seen what happens when one person decides enough is enough." I swallowed. My voice felt small but steady. "You did not have to do that for me." He shook his head. "I did not do it for you. I did it because it was right. Because no one deserves to be treated like you were today. Because I know what it feels like when the whole room watches and no one moves." The words struck something deep in me. A place I kept locked. A place that remembered every time silence had hurt worse than cruelty. Something in my chest cracked open, releasing a shaky breath I did not know I had been holding for years. Ronan was still watching me, studying me, with the same quiet intensity he had used when he first walked into the diner. But now the intensity felt protective instead of intimidating. He spoke again, and his voice softened in ways I had not heard before. "Kid, you walk tall, even if life wants to make you believe otherwise. You walk tall. The world just needs to catch up." The words washed over me with a force that almost buckled my knees. No one had ever said something like that to me. Not with sincerity. Not with understanding. Not with recognition. A moment stretched between us, something fragile and grounding at the same time. It felt like a fracture healing. It felt like breath returning to lungs that had not worked right all morning. The diner was still filled with people staring at us, but for the first time since walking in, I did not feel like a spectacle. I felt human again, seen, valued, and the truth settled inside me in a way that brought a warmth to my chest. His words did not just lift me, they changed something in me, maybe small, maybe temporary, but deeply. The kind of change that stayed with you long after the moment ended. Ronan stepped back slightly, giving me space. "You ready to leave?" he asked. For the first time that morning, I nodded without fear holding me back. "Yes, I am." 2 days later, I sat in the second row of the Redwood Valley Community Hall, the same town that had watched me shrink in a diner now gathered in metal folding chairs that screeched against the floor every time someone shifted. The ceiling fans above us spun lazily, pushing warm air from one side of the room to the other. It smelled like lemonade, old wood, and nerves. People kept glancing toward me, their eyes softer than they had been that morning in the diner, but their guilt still flickered like shadows across their faces. I held my sketchbook in my lap, the cover cool under my fingers, and breathed in through my nose, steadying myself. I was not sure why I had come at first. Part of me wanted to disappear to pretend none of it had happened. But another part of me knew hiding was how silence stayed alive. And silence was what had hurt me more than the laughter. At the front of the room, the mayor tapped the microphone until it let out a piercing squeal that made everyone wince. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice tight with discomfort. Tonight, we want to talk about what happened at the diner and what it means for our town. People shifted again, their bodies tilting toward him like they were bracing for impact. I noticed the waitress from the diner near the back. She kept wringing her hands, her eyes never lifting from the floor. The manager sat beside her, looking like the apology he gave me had carved itself into his spine. Then the mayor turned to the side of the stage and said, "Ronan, come on up." A low ripple moved through the crowd. Ronan straightened his jacket and walked toward the podium with steady, unhurried steps. He was not wearing leather today, just a plain, dark shirt and boots, but even without the patches, people seemed to sit a little straighter as he approached. He rested both hands on the podium. The microphone hummed. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked out at them the same way he had read the diner that day, quietly taking in the energy, the guilt, the fear, the curiosity, the unspoken question hanging in the air. "What now?" When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and low, carrying easily to the back wall. A couple of days ago, he began, "I stood between a young woman and 3 men who thought it was their right to humiliate her. You saw the footage. You know what they did." The room was silent in that heavy way that meant the truth had already settled inside people before he said it. But the part you did not see, he continued, the part that matters just as much, is how quiet this room would have stayed if no one had asked to see that footage. He let that sit. People shifted. Someone cleared his throat. A woman near the aisle dabbed the corner of her eye. Ronan's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in conviction. "I know many of you," he said. "You are good people, hard-working people. But good people can stay quiet too long, and when they do, the wrong ones get louder." He looked at the manager, at the waitress, at the elderly man who had hidden behind his newspaper that morning. They lowered their gazes like school children caught cheating on a test. Then Ronan surprised them. He softened. "I am not here to condemn you," he said. "I am here to remind you that silence is not neutral. It is a choice." And last week, silence backed the wrong side. My heart thudded against my ribs. People shifted forward, drawn in, uncomfortable, but listening. That morning in the diner, he continued, "I stepped in because the girl they mocked deserved better. But I also stepped in because I have been where she stood. I have felt that same weight." He paused then, and something inside him seemed to gather itself. "You all know what I have been through. You know my wife died in a fire I could not pull her from. You know I left the department after that. You also know I spent years trying to rebuild myself." His voice wavered only slightly, barely noticeable unless you knew what to hear for. The room held its breath. "Loss changes you," he said, "but so does courage. And sometimes courage shows up in the form of a stranger who refuses to let you be alone in your pain." My chest tightened. I stared down at my hands, unsure of how to hold the weight of those words. Ronan stepped back from the podium and turned toward the mayor. "Sir, if you do not mind," he said, "I think the town should also hear from the person who survived the worst of that morning." My stomach dropped. I felt the blood rush in my ears. No, I could not. But people turned. Faces appeared over shoulders. The mayor nodded, encouraging but not pushing. Ronan's eyes found mine. They did not demand. They invited. "You do not owe them anything," he said quietly enough for only me to hear. "But you deserve to take up the space they tried to take from you." My breath caught. Somewhere inside me, something small but strong rose. I pushed my neighing aside and rolled forward to the aisle. The room parted around me like water. Every face turned toward me. For the first time, their eyes did not make me want to disappear. I reached the podium. My voice trembled at first. "I am not here to talk about them," I said. "I am here to talk about everyone who watched." People stiffened. My voice steadied. I know it is scary to stand up for someone. I know it is easier to look away, but I also know what silence does to a person. It makes them believe they are worth less than everyone else. My throat tightened, but I pushed through. That morning, I felt invisible in a room full of people. But I am not invisible. And no one should ever feel that way again. A tear slid down my cheek, but I did not hide it. I lifted my chin. If one person had spoken up, just one, everything might have been different. So let today be the day this town wakes up. Let today be the day silence stops being the safest option. The room was silent for a heartbeat, then another, then someone stood, then another, and another. Soon, the entire hall was on its feet in a wave of applause that rolled over me like warm sunlight breaking through a storm. I let out a long breath I did not know I had been holding for years. This town had a long way to go. But for the first time, I believed it could get there. And for the first time, I felt taller than the room around me, even with a damaged leg, even with a scarred past, even with a voice that trembled, because I had spoken, and the town had listened. If you are still here with me right now, it probably means something in this story touched a place inside you that most people do not talk about out loud. Maybe it reminded you of a moment when you stood in a room full of people and felt completely alone. Maybe it took you back to a time when someone looked at you and decided who you were before you had the chance to speak. Or maybe you remember watching something wrong unfold in front of you and wishing afterward that you had stood up just a little sooner. We all carry those moments. They sit in us like small stones we pretend are too light to feel until something like this story presses on them, and suddenly the weight is undeniable. That diner could have been anywhere. Those three men could have been anyone, and silence could have swept the whole thing under the rug like it always does. But it did not. Not this time. And maybe that is why you are still listening, because you know how rare it is for someone to stand up when standing up costs something. Maybe you know what it feels like to be looked at the way they looked at me. Or maybe you know what it feels like to be Ronan standing between cruelty and someone who never asked for a fight. The truth is, this story is not just mine. It belongs to every person who has ever carried pain quietly because speaking up felt dangerous. It belongs to every person who has ever swallowed their voice because they did not want to cause trouble. And it belongs to every person who has ever wished they could go back and choose courage instead of silence. If you felt something rise in your chest while listening, if you felt anger tighten your jaw or sadness sting your eyes, then hear me when I say this. That feeling is exactly why this place exists. Stories like this remind us of the world we live in, but they also remind us of the world we could live in if more people chose to step forward. Not with fists, not with shouting, but with the kind of quiet courage that says, "This is wrong, and I will not pretend I do not see it." You might be sitting in your living room right now, or lying in bed, or riding in a car somewhere between work and home. Maybe you are older now, and you have watched too many years go by, filled with moments where people forgot how to care for one another. Maybe you know better than anyone how heavy silence can be. But you also know this: it is never too late to choose differently. It is never too late to be the person who speaks first, the person who stands up, the person who says enough. If this story moved you, then imagine what happens when thousands of voices feel the same thing at the same time. Imagine what happens when people who care gather in one place not just to be entertained, but to remember who they are and what they believe in. That is why we tell these stories, because someone out there needs a reminder that they are not alone. Someone needs a stranger to walk through the door like Ronan did and shift the whole room back toward what is right. And someone might be waiting for a sign that today is the day they stop shrinking and start standing. If that someone is you, then I want you to stay. Stay for the stories that reach into the parts of your life you thought no one else understood. Stay for the moments that make you remember the good that still exists in the world. Stay because healing grows faster when we do not do it alone. Stay because your voice matters. And if you want to be here with us, if you want more stories that challenge you, lift you, and remind you who we can be at our best, then you are welcome in this community. Pull up a chair. You belong here.